everything is going to hell down here in Texas.
Yeah, what's up, everybody? This is episode 220, sexual, of the Lone Gunman podcast. This is your host, Big Bad Bob, with you. That's right. And we're here for another exciting episode of the Lone Gunman podcast on this fine, beautiful spring day. Breathe in the pollen. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about, folks. All right. Today, we have a fine show planned out for you. First thing we're going to get into, folks, is a certain rifle. Now, Doug, my buddy, my brother from another mother, my co-host of Quick Hits and the host of the Dallas Action Podcast, has done a lot of work on a certain rifle known as the Johnson 30-06 rifle, owned by Gerald Patrick Hemming. This thing was a beast of a sniper rifle. And in the Warren Commission report, there are certain other reports. And there's one in there known as the Watley report, the Dick Watley report. And it kind of covers a little bit of the this Johnson 30-06 rifle, and how Jerry Patrick Hemming and Lauren Hall pawned this rifle in California, in Hollywood, to a private investigator that also owned a pawn shop, Richard Hathcock, and his co-worker, Roy Payne. And the fact that the FBI were sniffing around, asking questions about this rifle the day after the assassination, would leave you to believe that they had this rifle in their possession, and that for some reason, whether through fingerprints or somebody talking, figured out the provenance of this rifle and who had been handling it recently. So fast forward to the HSCA investigation. And I actually have a report here to Dave Marston of the HSCA from investigator Gayton Fonzie. And it has to do with the investigation of this rifle, of Richard Hathcock, of Roy Payne. And I'm not sure if Doug's ever saw this or found out about it or talked about it. I can't remember. But we're going to do that here today. And then we're going to also be diving into some other little tidbits and fun stuff. But let's get right into this rifle, man. So this memo, I guess, or report, whatever you want to call it, is from February 18th in 1976. So this is early on. So it starts off like this. following up on the remote possibility that what Sylvia Odio in late September 63 was a guy who had a mohawk haircut earlier in the year. I contacted Richard Hathcock in Los Angeles. He's working in an investigative branch of county government now. According to Commission Document 1179, he was operating a store called the Adventurer's Corner in LA when Dick Watley came in early in 63 with two other men, all three of whom were wearing green fatigues, and one of the men was wearing a, quote, mohawk haircut. Commission Document 1179 lists Watley's address as the same one that was used at the time by Jerry Patrick Hemming and Howard K. Davis. Check the Bio Pauli article for Davis's interesting connections. Hathcock says that CD 1179 had known Watley for several years, and when Lauren Hall and Jerry Patrick Hemming came in to borrow money on that 30-06 sniper rifle, they introduced themselves as friends of Dick Watley. Hemming confirmed that to me. I specifically remember redundantly questioning him about that. And aside, in writing about the initial misidentification of the Mannlicher Carcano as a 7.65 German Mauser by Deputy Sheriff Seymour Weitzman, a former sporting goods store manager, Robert Sam Anson notes, what makes the transmogrification of a large caliber German carbine to a smaller bore Italian bolt rifle especially intriguing is that in the assassination attempt against General Edwin Walker, which Marina had laid at the feet of her husband, the bullet, which was later declared too mangled for positive identification, was originally identified as a 30-06, which happens to be the same caliber as a 7.65 millimeter rifle bullet. Hathcock struck me as very open and cooperative in his conversation with me. He said he couldn't recall the names of the two other men who were with Watley, but he does remember that one of them was wearing a mohawk haircut. He said that time has naturally made his recollection hazy, and his conversation at the time was almost entirely with Watley. I remember him saying something about him knowing that they were going to be sold out at the Bay of Pigs, and that's why he got out of it. But he does think now that the fellow with the mohawk haircut was Latin-looking. When I asked him if Angelo or Leopoldo could have been either of the names, he said he couldn't swear to it under oath, but Leopoldo strikes a vague chord. It does sound quite familiar. I asked him if he might know where Watley might be now, and he said he hasn't seen him since the time mentioned in the report. But he suggested Jerry Patrick might know because it was through Hemming and Hall that I met Watley. I asked, you met Hemming and Hall prior to knowing Watley? And he said, oh yeah, sure. I'm positive about that. I'm still trying to figure out the significance of why Hemming would lie about that. Hemming also obviously fed me some misinformation about the check that Lauren Hall left with Hathcock when he returned to pick up the rifle. Now, according to Commission Document 1179, the check was drawn on the account of the Committee to Free Cuba. Hemming said that was an organization run by Dr. Terso del Junco, Cuban. When I asked Hathcock anti-Castro activity himself, he said only in an indirect way. He said there was a fellow named Matt Sovetic from Pittsburgh who years ago was an FBI informant inside the Communist Party. He had gained recognition as a result of his testimony before a Senate committee. Sovetic, said Hathcock, thereafter came out to California, and with Dr. Del Junco and a few other prominent citizens, he had founded a committee called Free Cuba Now. Hathcock said Sovetic had asked him to act as a PR guy for that for a while, and he did. He said he only went to a couple of meetings, and when I asked him if the Free Cuba Committee was what Lauren Hall might have written a check on, he said, oh no, I'm sure it wasn't on that. He had nothing to do with that committee. Hathcock may have been wrong about his recollection of the name of that committee. When I checked with Dr. Del Junco, he said it was called the American Committee to Free Cuba. It was, as Hathcock said, a group composed mostly of prominent Californians. Del Junco says he has absolutely no recollection of the name Lauren Hall and does not know Jerry Hemming. He's pretty sure the committee's account was at the Bank of America or the California Bank or some other major bank. In fact, he says he has never heard of a Citizens Bank in the area. CD 1179 says the check was a Citizens Bank check. Dr. Del Junco says he doesn't see how Lauren Hall could have had anything to do with a check involving his committee. He says his group was strictly a local organization and had no Miami connections, was not involved with Manuel Artime, and did not aid or fund any specific anti-Castro activity. Although his committee wasn't involved with any other, Dr. Del Junco did say he used to speak regularly for Dr. Schwartz's Christian anti-communist crusade. He wasn't involved, he says, with Dr. Hargis, and when I asked him if he had any connection with Cuba, he gave me a definite no. So I think, despite what Hemming tells me, that Del Junco and his American Committee to Free Cuba is a dead end as far as a connection with Lauren Hall goes. The question now is, why the misinformation? And where and what was the Committee to Free Cuba to which account Hall wrote the check against? Right now, I have two suspicions. One is the possibility of a link with the Free Cuba Committee that Hunt says was set up at Mullen and Company in the book Undercover, page 141. The other, less conspiratorial, is an association with Texas oil man Lester Logue, although I doubt Logue would set up a front since he contributed directly to Hall and Hemming and other right-wing or other anti-Castro groups. A third possibility is the Free Cuba Committee mentioned by Anson on page 259. That was a New Orleans group which supported Bernier and, says Anson, at one time or another attracted David Ferry, Sergio Arcasha Smith, and Gordon Novell, and possibly even Oswald. The first possibility would be tough to check. I'll try to check with Logue on the second one if I can reach him. I'll check with Bernier on the third when I get to New Orleans. Meanwhile, I have also come up with some information that indicates that Hemming was, strangely enough, telling me the truth about one incident related to Hall. There is a Miami Police Department inter-office report dated November 1st, 1963, which indicates that Hemming reported that Hall had just stolen two guns from him. One was a jungle carbine and the other a Savage 22. However, the report also states that Hemming claimed that this same fellow Hall had recently stolen a Johnson 30-06 from him in California. Now it says here in parentheses, Hall did retrieve it from Hathcock on September the 18th. Now you see it, now you don't. Eh? And whatever happened to Dick Watley? Well, Hemming told me that he was now working with the DEA out of the CIA station at Homestead, the Air Force station. So yesterday I visited at the DEA headquarters here, which is a story in itself. The DEA is housed here in something called the Phoenix Building, in a fancy, new, and large office center on the edge of the city. DEA has the whole building, an impressive modernistic structure which looks like the corporate headquarters of a multinational operation, which I guess it is. The office of the deputy director, the guy I met with, is larger than the senator's. You can't help getting the impression that DEA is a very special government agency. Deputy Director David Costa told me that there is no Dick Watley working for the DEA, either as an agent or informant. So as far as Watley goes, I hit another stone wall. But my visit with Costa turned out not totally unprofitable. I had come up with a letter, as you may recall, from Costa to the federal judge handling the Sturgis auto theft case, indicating that Sturgis had worked with the DEA in a case involving a major narcotics smuggler. That actually came about through his friendship with Jerry Buchanan, who was the inside informant on the case. Buchanan and his brother Jim were involved with Sturgis in putting out the phony Oswald and Miami stories. Interestingly, Costa told me that it was Sturgis who approached the DEA about working for them. He said he had a lot of connections into the Cuban community and would be a valuable informant on drug trafficking. Costa said they turned him down as an informant because he was on parole, but they have used him on occasion to place their men into situations, with Sturgis providing the introductions. I specifically asked if Sturgis had provided any information about the drug involvement of Manuel Artime or any of his associates. He hasn't. That's funny because Pico, who himself is in contact with Artime, and Mescal both indicated to me that Sturgis is still in regular contact with Artime. But talking with Costa and his men who dealt with Sturgis, a guy in DEA's conspiracy section named Bill Warner, I got the impression that they didn't consider Artime a major figure, which is very contrary to the information I have from other, but I think very informed sources. Costa says Sturgis was a very valuable because he helped make a case against a Fort Lauderdale guy named Kenneth Bernstein, who was flying in tons of pot a week. We wanted Bernstein so bad we could taste it, as Warner put it. He had a big operation. It so happens that Bernstein was also an independent operator. Now, if you think I'm implying something about an impression I'm getting about DEA's operations, well, that's your paranoia. Which brings up Mitch Werble. Costa didn't want to talk much about Werble because his trial is coming up March 2nd. But if you haven't read it yet, I thought I'd point out some interesting things in that burger clipping I sent you about Werble. He remains a mystery character to me because of his long involvement with gun running, especially the possibility of his involvement with Joe Marola and Ruby's rabbi, Norman Rothman, and that added to the information about Ruby himself possibly doing some dealing, his association with El Tigre, Masfarar, and the Haitian Caper, and Masfar's very close relationship with David Ferry's pal, Eladio Duvalier, and of course his obvious links with the CIA. The points in the piece that fascinate me are Werbel's indication that he and Vesco were involved together in a CIA operation, possibly setting up a plant to produce assassination devices, Werbel's long and close personal relationship with Lucian Conine, the quote retired CIA agent now running the DEA's special operations. Dave, could you check out Hunt's book about his meeting with Conine after the DM assassination and send me a copy of reference, please? Vesco's ability to call in two DEA agents to electronically sweep his home, and the alleged bungling by the DEA of an investigation of Vesco's involvement with heroin smuggling. Now we tie all that in with Manuel Artime, big man in the Bay of Pigs operation and Hunt's closest buddy, now being a major figure in narcotics, with leaving goods allegations that there's a link between Artime and Vesco. With the DEA here indicating that they have no strong interest in Artime, with Sturgis working with the DEA, but not mentioning Artime's involvement with drugs. If my sources know it, Sturgis must know it. With Conine's collusion with Hunt, delay the DM assassination on Kennedy, and thereafter get a key job with the DEA, with Conine's relationship with Werble, Werbel's with Vesco's, and back to Vesco's with Artime. We obviously have only a latent image at this time, but it sure looks like it has the possibility of developing into a full circle operation. All right, so let's get back to Richard Hathcock and Roy Payne, interviewed by Gaten Fonzie. My name is Richard Hathcock. I once owned and operated Allied International Detective Agency. At the time that we're interested in, my offices were at 6715 Hollywood Boulevard in the Outpost building. About 2 months before the JFK assassination in Dallas, two men came to see me in my office. One was Jerry Hemming, who was using the name Jerry Patrick, and the other man was Lorenzo Hall, who liked to be called Skip Hall, whose real name was Pasillo, which I understand is a Cuban name. These men came to see me one afternoon, stating that they had heard of me because of my many years of undercover investigation of communism on the state college campuses here, when I worked for the Hearst chain, and some other activities, anti-communist activities that I've been involved in. They were here, they told me, to raise money with which to buy medicines and equipment, military hardware for a planned invasion of Cuba. That they were going to train troops in Guatemala which they actually did later. They told me that they were dead broke and that they were going to be here for 2 or 3 weeks. They had some other contacts that they wanted to see, raise money, but in the meantime, they needed $100. They wanted to borrow the $100, and what they had for security was a set of golf clubs and a rifle, which was a 30 caliber Johnson, modified to semi-automatic operation, which I believed held 9 rounds, and also was equipped with a 30 power Bushnell variable scope. I gave them the $100. They left the golf clubs and the rifle, and for several weeks after that, I saw both men frequently. Then my understanding was that Jerry Patrick had returned to Miami to set things in operation down there for the planned invasion of Cuba. What they had planned essentially was to blow up some oil storage tanks on the West Coast. Lorenzo Hall stayed here and was in the private eye office very often, almost every day. He told me that both he and Patrick had originally been in Castro's army when they believed that he was really trying to free Cuba from Batista, that they had fought hard, helped to put Castro in power, and then found out that he was a communist, had no interest in the people, and they turned on Castro with the result that both were imprisoned and sentenced to be shot. Both through manipulations and through friends managed to escape and get back to this country. They showed me lots of photos, gave me documents, and I do believe what they told me about those things. Eventually, I say, Patrick went back to Miami, and I did not see him after that. Shortly before the assassination, if memory serves me correctly, it was no more than 10 days before the assassination. Skip Hall and a big fat Mexican man whom I've never met before and whose name I don't recall now, but I'm sure the FBI has it, came to see me. They told me that they were going to Dallas to pick up some medicine and some other material, and they wanted to redeem the rifle. They gave me $50, told me to keep the golf clubs, and I got a note signed by Skip Hall that he had picked up the rifle, which I later gave to Jerry Crow of the FBI. What happened to that rifle? I don't know. Jim Garrison showed me a photo at one time, an 8x10 enlargement, which he said was made by the Dallas Morning News photographer seconds after the killing in Dallas. The photo showed a Dallas detective holding a rifle which was picked up on Dealey Plaza. The rifle looked to me exactly like the one I'd had in my office. I have combed the Warren report stem to stern. I find no mention of that rifle which was picked up in Dealey Plaza. I also find no mention of another rifle found on the second floor of the depository building. Let me just reiterate that. I found no mention of another rifle found on the second floor of the book depository building. I find no mention of that rifle which was picked up in Dealey Plaza. Skip Hall later told me that he had turned that rifle over to a doctor friend of his in Miami. Jerry Patrick told me later that that was a damn lie. That he had talked to Hall. And as far as he could find out, that was a lie about where the rifle was. But he told me that he had never recovered the rifle. The rifle was in my office all those weeks, and one of the gentlemen who worked with me in the detective business, Roy Payne, who was a gun expert and a gun nut, assembled and disassembled and reassembled that rifle on numerous occasions. And I'm sure that Mr. Payne can tell you a great deal more about the rifle than I can. The day after John Kennedy was killed in Dallas, I received a phone call from Jerry Crow, an FBI agent here in Los Angeles, who asked if I had an agent working for me who was named Roy Payne, and I said yes. Jerry wanted to know if he could come by the office and see me and Mr. Payne, and we arranged for that meeting. It's my opinion that the reason he wanted to see Mr. Payne was because Payne's fingerprints undoubtedly were all over that rifle from his having handled it so many times. It's also my opinion that unless that particular rifle had been found or in some way involved in this whole thing, the FBI would have no interest at all. And I think that we better let Roy Payne pick it up from here. Signed on this date, under perjury, under penalty of perjury, that everything is true and correct to the best of my belief and knowledge. Richard Hathcock, on March 9th, 1977. So, folks, very interesting. Now, this FBI agent mentioned here, Jerry Crow. It's interesting that the only copy of an FBI report done up by Jerry Crow of the Los Angeles office of the FBI is in some of A.J. Weberman's nodules, and it is a reproduction of the verbiage in said report. We don't actually have a physical copy of that report, at least that I have found, or at least that I have not found yet. So if anybody out there knows of the original Jerry Crow report done on November 23rd, 1963 in Los Angeles, that details his meeting with Hathcock and Payne, let me know. I would be very interested to see the original report. But so far, we just have the A.J. Weberman nodule to go on, and good luck finding it. I believe all that's been since wiped off the internet. You got to get on the, you got to get in the internet time machine and Wayback Machine and kind of dig through that way to find it again. And it's a daunting task, so good luck. But if anybody knows where the original can be seen, let me know. So let's move on to Roy Payne, what he said. My name is Leroy Barton Payne. I was a co-partner, an agent for Allied Industrial and International Detectives with Dick Hathcock. Our office at the time of this occurrence was at 6715 Hollywood Boulevard in the Outpost building. I have heard and have listened to Mr. Hathcock make his statement, and I agree with him in every aspect of his statement, and I will, to the best of my recollection, account my experiences with Jerry Patrick and Lorenzo Pasillo, alias Skip Hall or Lauren Hall. I first met them when they came into the office in the Outpost building. And in the description of these two gentlemen, Jerry Patrick was tall, blonde, wearing jump boots and trousers tucked into the top, very much a Joe Palooka type. Skip Hall professed to be an ex-Marine, I believe officer, I'm not sure, at least this is what he told us. Small, wiry, dark hair, olive complexion. He at one time introduced us to his wife. I do not recall what her name was. They lived in an apartment, I believe, in Monterey Park, somewhere near the State College campus. They were out here on a speaking and fundraising campaign for going back to Cuba. And as I remember, they were out gathering various types of military accoutrements, weapons, medicines, so on and so forth. How they obtained these weapons was not part of any information that was given to Mr. Hathcock or myself, though they did tell me, or rather Lauren Hall did tell me, that he had his he had his closet in his apartment full of weapons, and that he was afraid the FBI was going to come in there and raid the place and take him along, and they were going to have to smuggle them out, and that they were getting ready to go back to Cuba. He drew us a map of an inlet on the shore south of Havana or near Havana that was the oil storage reservoir and tank farm. It showed on this map the tank farm and several storage docks, and what they had planned on doing was taking a boat to Kingston, Jamaica, refueling, and then going in as frogmen to take satchel charges of plastic explosive and set them on the storage tank farm and dock area and destroy this to cripple Cuba by getting rid of all the food, getting rid of all the fuel, oil, gasoline, etc., that was presently being stored for Castro. About, I would say, 10 days, maybe a month, somewhere along in there, prior to President Kennedy's assassination. Here I am fuzzy on the exact period. But Lauren Hall and a fat Mexican fellow came in and redeemed the rifle. Now, this rifle, I had been told that it had gone on several Cuban raids in the past. And knowing that it was very easy to modify a weapon such as this to make it fully automatic, and that it did have 9 rounds in the chamber, 9 rounds in the weapon, and 1 in the chamber, making it a 10-round weapon that could be fired automatically. I took the weapon and test fired it, and then pulled it apart to make sure it had not been tampered with. It had not, and was a straight semi-automatic weapon. It was a Johnson semi-automatic 30-06 with a 30 power variable Bushnell scope, very much like a telephoto lens on a camera. I would say that this weapon, properly sighted in, could put a hole in a dime at 500 yards. And that, folks, is a hell of a rifle. The bullets could be fired as fast as one could pull the trigger. 10 seconds, 10 rounds or less. They picked this weapon up and signed a note that they had picked it up, as I was present in the office when these 2 gentlemen were here to pick the weapon up. Approximately the next day or 2, they left for Miami. I made the statement to this Lauren Hall, well, we'll be reading about you in the paper. Well, Dick and I went about our business as normal as far as the agency was concerned, and didn't really think about them except to say, well, we haven't heard anything. 5 days prior to the assassination of President Kennedy, on a Monday, Mr. Hall was in Hollywood, California, in front of our building talking with Mr. Hathcock. And I stopped and talked to them. And of course, I said, well, why don't you come over and let's go get a cup of coffee and tell us what happened? And he said, well, no. He says, I've got to make the plane for Dallas. The situation with Mr. Hall is that he stated to me when I asked him, well, what happened during the situation? We didn't hear anything. And he said the CIA confiscated and arrested everybody at a boat in Miami. And I asked him at that time why he didn't get himself arrested also. And he said, well, he was on the dock and could not be connected to the situation. They didn't have any evidence against him, so they let him go. I'm going to make an assumption now, or a relatively educated assumption, that the CIA is not an arrestive body, nor are they an nor are they an internal United States intelligence agency functional agency. This I did not recall. It just didn't make any sense to me until later. Of course, Friday, I believe, November 22nd was the assassination. That Friday was the assassination at noon in Los Angeles, our time. And the next day, I received a phone call from my business partner, Dick Hathcock, telling me there was a gentleman coming to the office that wanted to talk to us. That gentleman was a special agent of the FBI, a man named Jerry Crow, who is still presently at the FBI and at the Los Angeles field office. Mr. Crow came in and I opened the door for him, and he showed me his identification. He had a big bundle of papers with him and a large manila envelope. He introduced himself and said, and I said, hi, my name is Roy Payne. Come on in. I introduced him to Mr. Hathcock, my partner, and Mrs. Hathcock was there also. And he put his bundle down on the chair in front of the desk and took some papers out and said, I would like to ask some questions about Skip Hall and Roy Payne. And I said, well, I'm Roy Payne, so why don't you ask me whatever you want to ask? He seemed rather surprised that I was there. At least that was the impression I got. We discussed the situation about what had occurred and what has gone on with Jerry Patrick Hemming and Skip Hall, Lorenzo Pasio, and so on. Then I did not see him for quite some time after that. I did, however, find that the FBI or someone was, I can only make an assumption, following me and did tail me for some months after this initial conversation. We had an ex-brother-in-law who was, and I'm not correct with this, but he is deceased now. His name was Harvey Berkey, who was the assistant agent in charge of the local field office for the FBI here. In asking or making an attempt to ask Harvey what the heck was going on, Harvey refused to talk to me, and I could not gain entrance to his house. He would not answer the door, nor would his wife or his children. There was on one occasion I did run into Harvey Berkey outside my office with Mr. Hathcock, and he did not want to talk to me at all and excused himself and said he had to go. I did, within the week after the assassination of the president, have occasion to go to Palm Springs. I believe it was on a Thursday, and I stayed in a small motel upon entering the town. About 3 o'clock in the morning, I had occasion to see two gentlemen go through my vehicle pretty thoroughly, and they had keys to enter and to go through the car. They went through the glove compartment. I had evidence prior to that my vehicle had been entered and searched, as well as our offices, which then had been moved to Allied Detectives, moved to 6605 Hollywood Boulevard on the third floor. We had Suite 310, which covered several rooms. And we did have a system to show whether our offices had been entered, such as, seeing as we had the only keys, and our offices had been entered and the files had been searched several times. We feel, or I feel, that our telephones, both at home, the answering service for the office, and both of our homes had been tapped. This went on for several months. The next night, Saturday after the assassination, I had to drive to Santa Monica. Sorry. There's no T in Monica. And was there overnight. There were 3 vehicles that followed my car up the PCH all the way up to Santa Monica, and then picked me up the next day when I went through several of the small towns in the rural area and ended up on Highway 99, which is now the I-5, and then came back to the Ridge route. The same subject vehicles that had followed me on the next day after the assassination were the same vehicles that I saw in Palm Springs a week later, along with same gentlemen that were in them. Like I said, this went on for some time, 2 to 3 months after the assassination. And one afternoon, about 10 days or 2 weeks after the assassination, at about 4:30 in the afternoon, I received a phone call at the office from Loren Hall. And I said, hey, buddy, you better have a lot of witnesses because you were in Dallas at the time of the assassination. And he said, I've got witnesses to prove that I was right in the middle of the lobby of the Hilton Hotel, and 100 people know I was there, and I was nowhere near Dallas when Kennedy was assassinated. When the district attorney of New Orleans, Jim Garrison, came to California with an order and request to extradite 2 gentlemen, one was from Burbank, the other gentleman was Skip Hall. The same man, in a newspaper statement that Mr. Hall had made, he stated that he had never been in the state of Texas, yet he had told me that he had gone to Texas, that he was leaving that Monday prior to the assassination to go to Dallas specifically, and that he had 100 witnesses in a hotel to show that he had been in Dallas, but nowhere near the assassination site. So let's see here. I've never heard again from Loren Hall. He had never made any attempt to contact me or call me. He did tell me at the time of this one phone call that several attempts had been made on his life, that his car had been bombed once or twice and it had been blown up. He said someone else had started the vehicle and had blown up with it. I have no direct knowledge that there was an automobile bombing. I've never pursued the situation. I did on one occasion go and drive out to visit Jerry Patrick Hemming, who was living somewhere down the San Bernardino Freeway in Monterey Park, Montebello. He discussed with me at the time about turning over the rifle to them, and he didn't like the idea that the rifle went down there to Dallas, since he felt it was his rifle, and the golf clubs that were also hawked at the time the original meeting were Lauren Hall's, and that the rifle was his. And other than that particular conversation, I never had any further contact with Jerry Patrick, no further contact at all with Lauren Hall. I understood that he'd been living somewhere in Central California for a period of time in a compound type area and operated a bar or cocktail lounge or a beer bar or tavern in the downtown area. Then I understood later from Dick Hathcock that he is now back down here in Southern California and is living somewhere in the Monterey Park, Montebello area and has been in and out of the hospital once or twice. But other than that, I have no direct knowledge to bring situations up to date. I declare under penalty of perjury the above is true and correct to the best of my knowledge. Leroy Barton Payne, March 9th, 1977. So, folks, interesting stuff here. And a little more light shed on the 30-06 rifle that had been allegedly found in Dealey Plaza. And now we have a specific area, second floor of the school book depository, with Roy Payne and Lauren Hall's fingerprints all over it. I mean, why else would they have been, would the FBI have been in California the day after the assassination, wanting to know the whereabouts of Roy Payne and Lauren Hall if they didn't actually have the rifle? But if you go back and you look at the official documentation from that day, good luck about them finding a 30-06 rifle anywhere in Dealey Plaza or the school book depository. And what happened to the rifle? Jerry Hemming told Hathcock that he never got the rifle back. That he said Hall gave it to some doctor or dentist in Miami, but that was a lie. Hemming said he never got the rifle back. Now, if the FBI had got their hands on this rifle, and it was found in Dealey Plaza or in the book depository, I highly doubt that they would ever give that rifle back to Jerry Hemming. Ever. So, interesting stuff there. Moving on. Next up, we have an interesting letter that I've come across to Jim Garrison in July of 1967 from one Captain Valentine Ashworth. Mr. Garrison, sir, my name is Captain Valentine Ashworth. I am a white male, aged 36 years old. I am an airplane pilot and have been referred to the press at different times and in different countries as a mercenary. I am now hired and affiliated with the Cuban radar community in the capacity of an officer with the rank of captain. The Cuban Radar Command is the air arm of the People's Revolutionary Cuban Army, now training here in the United States with headquarters in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I'm also affiliated with the ARA, a communications outfit, mainly training there in New Orleans. I'm not going to read the whole thing, just the juicy parts, folks. He's associated with Manny Manolo Rey, a Manny Fernandez, and a Herman Fernandez. and all the other Cuban exiles. Manuel Rey was a famous nightclub entertainer in Havana. Then later, he was the first minister of the Public Works and Utilities under Castro until he had to get out of the country for helping exiles. Mr. Garrison, I am telling you what I consider will be enough to convince you that what I am telling you is authentic. The reason I am telling you anything at all is because there has been 2 attempts made on my life since you have started your investigation, sir, about Kennedy. Mr. Garrison, I know Lee Harvey Oswald. I first met Oswald there in New Orleans. That was before he went to Russia. Oswald and myself were both trying to join the Cuban exiles at that time. I can show you the bar where I first met Oswald and where we roomed at for a while there in New Orleans. Then Oswald and myself went from New Orleans to somewhere, Columbus, together to try to join the Cuban exile army. I can show you the motel where we stayed in Columbus, Ohio, and where all we went there. That is where I first seen the man that somebody called Clay Shaw. Harvey knew him then because he talked to him and some more men. The next time I saw Oswald and Clay Shaw was in New Orleans. That is when I seen most of the other men that you mentioned in your investigation. I sit and listen to them talk in a bar there. Mr. Garrison, I know definitely there was a plot made on Kennedy's life, but I did not take it seriously at the time. I know the Cuban exiles was involved in the plot. It is my contention and conviction that the Central Intelligence Agency was involved. But to what extent they were involved, I don't know. I don't know. Mr. Garrison, I have respectfully renounced my citizenship ever since 1963 to the FBI and the Justice Department, demanding to be deported from the United States. You can check with the Justice Department and the FBI on this. And something I did not tell the FBI and the Justice Department this, but I want to be deported from the U.S. because I fear for my personal security here. I have contacted the Un-American Activities Committee requesting for a hearing before them to demand to be deported before the committee. Mr. Garrison, if you don't mention my name to the FBI or the CIA or any other law enforcement agency, if you can arrange for my immediate deportation from the United States after my testimony, then I will take the stand and testify for you. Sorry, this is handwritten. And tell you all I know. But I need a guarantee of what I've requested. I need to be deported. Then I will have to evoke the fifth, if not, and say nothing. This is the first time that I have mentioned these facts to anyone before. I do so now because I feel I must get out of the United States as soon as I can. Because I know now that there are people who think I know too much in regard to your investigation about the Kennedy plot. If you can accept my offer, or if I may, I don't know what that word is, then I still request and expect your utmost confidence on this matter. Release, as I have stated, there has been 2 attempts made on my life at this time. Mr. Garrison, Mr. Garrison, if you wish to talk with me, then you can contact me through my attorney, Mr. Hardy Martell Parkerson, 1901 Oak Park Boulevard, Lake Charles, Louisiana. Phone number 436-3321. I hope you will give my letter your immediate and utmost attention and consideration. Very sincerely, Captain Valentine Ashworth. Okay. Valentine Ashworth. Folks, don't know how much faith you want to put in his letter to Garrison, but there it is. Apparently, he met Lee Harvey Oswald before he went to the Marines as a 15, 16-year-old teenager, and they wanted to join the Cuban exiles and actually took a trip to Columbus, Ohio for this reason. Interesting. All right, and last thing we're going to talk about today is Warren Reynolds, folks. So, according to his police report, and this is, let's see, trying to look for a date here, 1/23/64. Officers received a call to meet ambulance 601, a shooting 500 East Jefferson at Johnny Reynolds Motor Company. On arrival, Warren Reynolds, a white male, 28, was lying on a couch in the office of the car lot office. Mr. Warren Reynolds had been shot in the head and was taken to Methodist Hospital by ambulance 601. Blood trails showed that the complainant was possibly shot in the basement by the light switch box. Appeared that complainant came from the basement and fell on hood of car in front of office, then entered the office and tried to use the telephone and fell on the couch. Mr. Sonny Cordy of 425 North Jefferson, room number 5, stated he heard one shot that sounded like a .22 rifle and ran to the front porch of his home. He stated the car lot was brightly lighted and observed an unknown male, 5'5", wearing brown khaki pants and a blue flower shirt, run by in front of the office and south in the 200 block of South Patton, carrying a rifle. Mrs. Christine Jeffries of the 200 block of South Patton, something in the suspect ran by her carrying a rifle. Sergeant Davis, 500 and 309 at the scene. Mr. Reynolds' glasses were found broken on the floor of the basement, and a .22 rifle bullet was found on the floor. Bullet and glasses were taken to the lab. Johnny Reynolds of West 5 Mile Parkway stated that he was at home and that his brother closes the lot at night. Johnny Reynolds stated he had no idea what the shooting could have occurred over. It was apparent that Warren Reynolds had not been robbed. J.W. Robbins found a blue shirt in laundry wrapping in the street between the 2 and 300 block of South Patton. Unknown if this shirt is connected with the shooting. Placed in property room under this offense number. The condition of Warren Reynolds at 11:15 p.m. was critical in emergency at that time. The supplementary offense report done by, let's see, I don't have the officer's name. But it was done on January 26th, so 3 days after the shooting. On the 24th of January, this officer interviewed Mr. L.J. Lewis of 7616 Hume. He's a salesman at Reynolds' car lot, and he showed this officer the basement and general area where the offense occurred. He said the light bulb in the basement had been screwed out the night before. He had no further info other than that. This officer then interviewed Johnny Reynolds, who is the comp's brother. At this time, he had no info to give this officer. One of the witnesses, Sonny Carty, a white male, 25, before 25 East Jefferson, unemployed, was then interviewed. He stated he was watching television and heard one shot in the direction of the car lot. He ran down the hill to the balcony, or hall to the balcony, and stated he saw a man running out the rear of the car lot with a rifle in his hand. He stated the man had on what appeared to be khakis and a blue sports shirt. It appeared to be a white man and was small. The car lot was still lit up, so he was able to see good. He stated he saw Warren Reynolds stagger up to the office. He also noticed a white-colored compact car believed to be a Valiant was parked in front of the lot. By the time he ran back through the hall and downstairs, the car was gone. It had 2 men and a woman in the front seat. He ran over to the lot and asked Reynolds what happened. All he would say was he didn't know. This is all Mr. Carty knew. This officer had attempted to contact him once or since, but has heard that he moved. This officer then interviewed Eddie Benevides, a white male, 2107 Dealey Garland. He is a salesman at Douche's car lot across the street from where the offense occurred. He stated he was in the back of the building and did not know anything had happened until the ambulance and police arrived. His brother, Donnie Benevides, also works on cars at the lot. He told Eddie that he was working under a car and someone walked up and was standing around. He thought it was his helper and chewed him out for just standing around and doing nothing. This someone told Donnie to not get smart with him. But then he rolled out from beneath the car and saw that it was not his helper. He stated he did not get too good of a look at this person. It is unclear if this person had anything to do with the offense. This officer then interviewed Mr. Albert Shin, white male, 28. He lives in the rear of Dudley's funeral home and works there. He stated he rode in the back of the ambulance with the complainant, and all the complainant talked about to him was he asked for something that would make him easier, that he was hurting. Mr. Shin stated that he was bleeding very bad at the time and seemed to be in severe pain. This officer then interviewed Mrs. Christine Jeffries, white female, 429 East 12th apartment 101. She stated she had just walked out to her car, which was parked on Patton, and she observed a man running down the street towards her from that car lot. He had a rifle in his hand, waving it as he was running. He ran by her, but she stated she was so startled that all she really looked at was the rifle, but then the man appeared to be a small man, about 5'5" or 5'6", just about her height. He could not decide if he was white or colored. He did think that he had a cap on. He then turned on down the driveway by the Jehovah Witness Church. It stated he turned right on Denver and appeared to be running back toward 12th, but a car drove by and its lights hit him. He then turned and ran back down Denver, which is actually an alley. She could not see how far he went because of the buildings. This officer noticed that a vacant lot with a lot of trees and brush beside the Oak Cliff Library. With the assistance of Detective Warner, he searched the area hoping to find the rifle, either in the brush or the garbage cans of the adjacent apartments. It was not found there. Mrs. Jeffries stated that her brother, J.W. Robbins, later found a blue shirt lying in the street in front of her apartment. It is very doubtful this shirt had anything to do with the offense. It had just come out of some laundry. This officer then went by the Methodist Hospital to interview Warren. He was unable to do so, but did interview Johnny again. He stated that he and Warren had some trouble with a colored boy named Gussie Lee Thomas, who used to work for them. This officer attempted to locate Gussie Thomas and traced him down to 1024 Red Oak. At this time, Johnny was contacted again and stated that he had been allowed to see Warren. Warren could not talk at the time, but he could nod his head in answer to questions. Johnny found out from him that it was definitely a white man and not colored. On January 25th, this officer received a tip from Mr. Gary Wigington, who owns the Garcia Chemical Company at 152 Express. Then when he came to work Friday morning, he noticed that his bookkeeper, Lionel Carey Rambo, white male, 43, had spent the night in the office. He was wearing a blue suit and had blood all over him. He told Mr. Wigington that he had been attacked by juveniles. He went home, and neither Mr. Wigington nor his mother has been seen since. Mrs. Rambo thinks he has left town and has a long record of drunkenness. He is not a good suspect because of his size and dress. This officer again interviewed Johnny Reynolds. He was allowed to talk to Warren that day, and Warren told him that he had already pulled the keys out of all the cars and locked them. He had then walked down to the basement where the fuse box is to turn out all the lights. He stated he flipped on the switch at the door for the light, but either the light wasn't working or it had burned out. He walked over to the fuse box, and so he reached for the fuse box. He was shot. And when he reached for the fuse box, he was shot. He stated he didn't know at the time if he was shot or shocked, but he remembers walking out of the basement and up the stairs. As he was walking up the stairs, the suspect ran up the stairs past him. All he noticed was it was a white man and he had a rifle. He also noticed it was a small, short man. At this time, the nurse at Methodist Hospital still would not allow this officer to interview Warren. On the morning of January 26th, this officer had a prisoner in jail, Darrell Wayne Garner. White male, 24, no address. There you go. He was arrested the night before in Topper's Cafe at 315 East Jefferson for being drunk and was talking about how sorry the Reynolds brothers were and that Warren had gotten what he deserved, etc. When this officer interviewed him, he was told that he lived at 1006 N1 Bishop with his wife and two children, and then he worked at Stevens Car Lot at 701 West Davis. God damn, them Reynolds boys are some sorry sons of bitches, man. They got what they deserve. So say Dago. He again contacted Johnny Reynolds and was told at this time about an anonymous phone call the day before the offense. The caller told him to go see Dago and then hung up. He stated that Dago's real name was Daryl Garner. Why don't you go see Dago then, you sorry sons of bitches? He then stated that Garner had come by the lot the previous day with the 57 Olds trying to see if the Reynolds would buy it, but he did not have the title, so they would not buy it, leaving Dago extremely upset. So yeah. Now, the reason this was interesting to me is because not only do we have, somebody who allegedly witnessed whoever shot Tippett running away get shot in the head, but also the mention of Eddie Benevides, who was Domingo Benevides' brother. Now, Domingo Benevides supposedly saw the Tippett murder go down, and his brother Eddie would be shot and killed a couple months later as well by two men in suits at a bar that was frequented by people that didn't wear suits. You know what I'm saying? People think that it may have been a case of mistaken identity, but was Eddie Benevides killed because he saw who actually tried to kill Warren Reynolds? Eddie State has this weird story, that he was at another auto shop right across the way from the Warren's car lot, or the Reynolds car lot, and he was working on a car, and he thought his helper was standing there. So he made a derogatory comment about his helper, and the guy said, "Why don't you come on out from under that car then, motherfucker, and we'll settle this like two grown-ass mans." Well, maybe it didn't go down exactly like that, but something like that, to that effect. And maybe he saw before, or maybe he was there to take out Domingo Benevides at that time and realized that he had Eddie instead of Dom, and then proceeded across the street to take out Warren Reynolds, another witness to whoever shot Eddie Tippett. Anyway, I thought it was interesting, for sure. But whoever it wasn't Dago. This bitch was about 5'5" and a tiny man. Dago was not a tiny man, folks. He was a big man, a confident man, a ladies' man, a good-looking bitch. He could pull any piece he wanted to. And actually, Dago and his two brothers took a lie detector test and passed it, for what it's worth. So yeah, there's that. But anyway, that's it for this one, you fine folks. Follow along on Twitter at the Lone Gunman 7. On YouTube, search for the Lone Gunman Podcast channel and subscribe and like and get a notification when a new episode drops. But I'd really appreciate it if you listened on a podcast app. That'd be great. And leave a review. Tell me what a great job I'm doing. Tell me how much of a dipshit asshole I am. I don't care. 1 star, 5, it really doesn't matter. Bring it on. Anyway, that's it for this week, folks. This is your boy, Big Bad Bob. Out.